Good morning, Nicholas.
Good morning, Narrim. I think we'll give it a couple of moments for all our participants to join as I can see it's all filling up there in the next couple of moments.
Are most of the participants based in Melbourne or Victoria, or are they all over the place?
Yeah, I think most of the people who are joining our webinars now are probably locally based. So welcome to those who are now joining. So thank you for joining today's webinar. I'm Nick Pateras, and today I'm welcomed by Narrim Segeal to discuss aspects of selling your business. Narrim's got a very long history in selling, representing particularly sellers in businesses, and at Wilson Pateras we see many different transactions that transform over the lifetime of our clients. I guess one of the perspectives we come from at Wilson Pateras is that we support our clients, particularly whilst they're trading their business, and that's the first financial benefit a person will enjoy from their business, which is the income they'll earn from their business. But ultimately, there will come a time where there's what was called a goodwill value or an enterprise value for a business, and that's where clients or people out in the community will look to sell their business. And so structuring your business for sale is incredibly important. We want people to do all the right things in place well before they're ready to sell. So we're blessed today to have an expert in the field, and without further ado, we'll let you tell us all about how to get your business ready for sale and to sell. So thanks Narrim for your help.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Nicholas, and I really welcome the opportunity. And as much as possible, if this can be as interactive as we can make it, that would be great. Just very briefly, a little bit about myself. I've owned 3 different businesses. I owned a chain of hearing clinics, which I started from 1 clinic and grew it up to 8 clinics and 15 staff, and sold that very successfully myself. Admittedly, I didn't use a broker, and I had the fortunate position where we had a couple of groups knocking at our door wanting to buy the business, and that's obviously the ideal scenario when people are coming to you and wanting to buy a business. I then approached a couple of others in the same sort of sector who were vertically integrated to potentially increase the competition, which was very successful. Prior to that, I'd spent 10 years in headhunting and recruitment, many of those years, 7 of those years with a large group, and then 3 years a partner in a business which was eventually sold to a much bigger group back in the 2000s. But that headhunting and recruitment background has certainly held me in really good stead in terms of what I do now, because instead of, headhunting for an individual, I'm often headhunting businesses and often targeting business. So, quite simply, the ability to be able to pick up the phone and target businesses, whether I'm working for a buyer or I'm working for a seller, is absolutely fundamental. And then from that point of view, presenting a business in a way is not dissimilar to presenting as an individual. You're presenting a business, and you have to sell it. You have to sell the business when you want to sell a business. So that held me in very good stead, as well as having worked in a corporate background. So I guess what I want to cover today, really importantly, is when is it a good time to sell the business? Why people buy businesses, and there are different types of buyers, and also want to talk about that from an acquisition strategy, whether it be Nicholas and his firm buying a whole series of businesses, which is a very good strategy when you can rationalise costs. Key points to consider in buying and selling a business. Planning, which is so important, and that's probably my biggest takeaway here today is the value of planning. Planning in the sale of the business. Looking at the value and determining the worth of the business, and the market often dictates, but to give a guideline on that and how we set the value of the business, and then the factors that influence vendors' decision to sell, and finally give you an idea about what's important and the information, the presentation pack in terms of what a buyer is looking for in terms of potential.
So just as we go into the presentation itself, one question is, and this may actually sound like a bit of a strange question, but why do people sell? In your experience, people when they come to you, what are their motivations for selling and their reasons for selling?
There's a whole lot of reasons for selling, and I love the best reasons why. I sold my hearing business because I really wanted more challenges, and so there are certain things that drive you. Money is often a criteria, but there are often other other things that drive you. I wanted to learn. I wanted to develop other skills. And I think, Nicholas, you and I spoke about before that you get to a certain age and you realise how little you do know. Unfortunately, I think in my 30s and early 40s, for example, I thought I knew a lot more. And I certainly realised how little I know. So that challenge, that learning is part of it. It could be health. It could be retirement. I mean, what we're seeing now, and I've seen more in the last 12 months, is people looking for balance. I think regional businesses outside of Melbourne and Victoria are becoming more attractive as people move to the regions. People move to the Bellarine Peninsula, Mornington Peninsula. Places like Shepparton and Bendigo are more attractive. Certainly the Victorian government is pushing infrastructure into those regions. And we're seeing, certainly in some of the areas that we're working in, the regions are very attractive. So that's what I would say. The best time to sell a business, and I know this sounds fairly clear, but it is really when you're ready. You need to be ready. And when I say that in terms of being ready, it's operationally and financially ready, and also mind-wise. There are a lot of people that think about selling a business, and they might say, "Oh yeah, I'm looking to sell my business. I'm looking to sell the business," but you've really got to be, you've got to be right, and it's got to be here where you're feeling very comfortable. It's at the right time. Now, obviously, the why is the realization of investments, realization from an investment point of view. I used to run a slide when I do some of these presentations with a picture of your kids. Are your kids going to buy the business? Maybe. I don't know. Most likely not. Most kids don't necessarily want to take over mum or dad's businesses. They usually want to do something else. They don't want to follow in their footsteps. So, that's what you need to do. And I'll talk to this in another slide, is that planning process. And the more that you plan, the better it is. Really important, and this is where I guess your firm and accounting firms really play a significant part, is making sure it's accurate and up-to-date information. Really, really important. So, that's critical to have that information. Ideally, if you have if you look at a business and you say, right here, when you're not quite to the peak, right, where people can see potential, that's the best time to sell a business. Not when it's, unfortunately, turned the corner and the last 2 years has been bad.
How does somebody get that assessment? Or it sounds very, it sort of sounds complex in itself, like to know when your business is at its peak. Is there a way of knowing or finding out or doing some analysis to determine whether you are in that position?
Well, certainly doing market reviews and certainly doing commercial reviews. I mean, whether it be myself in what I do, you as an accountant would be able to do some comparative data of where the business has been over the last, let's say, 3 or 4 years of time. There may be particular factors. For example, I'm doing quite a bit of work in the HVAC, heating and air conditioning space, especially heating space, cleaning space, in those sort of areas. And some of those have had huge spikes because we are spending more time at home. The query is this going to continue? Now, more than likely it is for a period of time. I don't think for at least the next 3 to 4 to 5 years, anybody's going to be spending 5 days a week in the office. So we are going to be spending more time at home. The pandemic has said, the word balance, which I've often used as being really important in my world, I think it's becoming more important in everybody's world, to say, well, I want a more balanced lifestyle. And if I want a more balanced lifestyle, I want my home to look better. So you spend more money on that sort of space. And I think Bunnings, even with lockdowns and all that sort of stuff, they've, and I've got some companies who supply to Bunnings that I'm selling, they've skyrocketed because people are spending more time at home. So you look at that and you say, okay, the uncertainty of lockdowns, of COVID, etc., do make it difficult, and it makes buyers more concerned about risk, and that's the biggest factor that I would say categorically that that buyers look at when they're assessing a business, is the risks in terms of future income.
So to make it to try and make the assessment somewhat scientific, is it fair to say that the two factors that determine the value, so this relates to when is it a good time to sell a business, the two factors are maintainable earnings, what have been historically the maintainable earnings and what are they likely to look going forward, and then the earnings multiple, what do you multiply that earnings by? So earnings multiple is a bit of that blue sky factor of how the future might look. Earnings are pretty much a calculation. You can put some dollars to it, or some hard numbers to that kind of thing. So I'd probably dare say, it would be probably fair to say some sort of analysis, almost like a valuation analysis, would be the best way to help determine that right time to sell question.
Absolutely spot on. I mean, I had an organisation who July last year was telling me this coming year was going to be the best year ever. And I said to them, let's hold off. What's the point of selling the business when we're, and their revenue was going to be, probably 40 to 50% better than it was in the previous year, because people are looking at, well, that's all good and well, prove it. Prove it to me. And we want a history and prove it to me. I spoke to somebody this morning who's only had a business for 3 years. He bought the business 3 years ago. The business unfortunately gone down in terms of revenue. So he wants to get out, but he's not going to get the same return that he might have got if the revenue was going up.
It sort of seems like people will pay a premium for recent historical performance over potential in the future. Like that knowledge that, yes, this business has performed, it's made a profit. That's a confirmed premium. Even though the old saying in investments is, historical performance is no indication of the future. But it seems like, to me, from my perspective, in small and medium businesses, people still pay a premium for that recent historical trading.
100%. The number of times a vendor says to me, look at the potential of this business. And I say, that's great, but somebody has to deliver on that potential. And that's what they have to do. You haven't delivered on the potential. And it's a hard conversation I have to have with the vendor, but they haven't delivered on the potential. So yes, the potential's there. You need to put in some systems, you need to put in processes, you need to do all that sort of stuff. That all happens. Yes, we can see the potential. However, why should a buyer pay for it? So it's an equation.
It's great advice. Yeah, it's great advice.
Pleasure. It just in terms of reducing of costs and also looking at it from an advisory perspective, I'm really strong on suggesting to either buyers or vendors to have advisors with you. So having Nicholas or a good accountant is so critical, and rarely are buyers not doing their due diligence properly. It just doesn't happen. And if you've got a good accountant or a good consultant, etc., that can provide that sort of advice, it's really important. From a vendor's point of view, having information ready. The last thing I want to be able to do, and I do have this, unfortunately, I've had this recently with one particular vendor where the information, where the buyer's asking more information, we've got a lot to start with, there's always questions. And the quicker that a buyer can respond with information to me, and usually it's either an internal accountant or external accountant that needs to assist in providing that, because that's the most critical person. And particularly if you're saying, okay, I want up-to-date information. What's happened in the last 3 or 4 months? Now, I understand we've got till June 30, but what's happened the last 3 or 4 months? If that's slow in coming, we're losing momentum. And particularly now, it's December 2. People want things to happen really quickly because we're all going to disappear for 3 or 4 weeks, and everyone's looking forward to a break. So really important to have that information and have transparent information.
So Narrim, when a vendor, sorry to interrupt, but when a vendor meets a prospective purchaser, it's almost like there's a bit of a trust process that has to be built. And as the potential purchaser, if you're selling, the potential purchaser is looking for reasons why trust can't be built. And if information can't be supplied, it's a barrier to building trust.
It's a flag. It's just a flag, and that's that's right. I'm seeing a client. I'm actually seeing a buyer. I said to the buyer, I don't understand their question, and neither does the vendor. And we don't. I said, we want to understand what the question is. I'm going to see them at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and I'm going to see their CFO, and it's a substantial manufacturing business, just to go through it. And so it's totally transparent. Apart from that, I guess my role is very much one of building a relationship up with buyers, so that they can feel, and it's my job to say, well, we want to, if a deal's going to be done, it's got to be a good deal, and there's no, the days of, who was it, Alan Bond, what was it, Alan Bond and the Kerry Packer, and I only find one Alan Bond. That doesn't happen most of the time. I mean, in small businesses, who then appoint good accountants, etc., to help them. You've got to be transparent, and you're looking for a situation where both parties are going to walk away satisfied. Yeah. Very important. So key points in terms of strategy of buying or selling a business, and I have been involved in a number of areas, also having had a headhunt bank dragon to help people and all businesses buy a business, particularly accounting firms and IT firms, which are in high demand. I don't need to tell you, Nicholas, how hard it is to find accounting firms to buy. And I know that's been your strategy for acquisition. How many firms have you bought?
Well over 10.
Yeah, it's a lot of firms. And so you've got a methodology, I assume, where you evaluate the firms, how you then accommodate people and all that sort of stuff. And that's attractive, so as opposed to, as for example, I sold a small accounting firm about 4 or 5 months ago, and there was a whole lot of individuals that wanted to buy it. And here's an example where most of those people were knocked out straight away because the vendor has worked, the accounting principal has had a whole series of clients that he's looked after, and he wants to make sure those clients, and they've been paying him for fees for the last X number of years. He just wants to make sure they're being looked after. What he gets for the business, he'll get, but it's all about then the retention and looking after those clients. So
do you find, Narrim, there's some sort of nuances between certain industries, like for instance, the industry that obviously that I operate in is very much a what you'd call a seller's market. There's
totally.
There's so many buyers for the one seller, but you must also represent industries where they're buyers markets, where there's not many buyers and probably a few more sellers. And how does that sort of influence people's thinking when they're going to a transaction?
Well, it does mean there's so for example, a plumbing business, the only people that are going to buy it is plumbers, whereas a cleaning business, you or I might buy a cleaning business. Yeah. So it opens up the market. So that limitation makes it harder. I've just done a deal for a speech pathology business, for example, and really, unless you're involved in speech pathology or you're associated or you're involved in allied health, there's still a lot of opportunities, and we actually got the price we wanted. So we positioned it correctly, we priced it correctly, we didn't overprice it, but we, at the same time, we got what we wanted, exactly what we wanted. The owner in this situation, so here's an example, the owner in this situation, and the speech pathologist has 5 consultants working for her and another 2 consultants, I think full time. She's staying on for 12 months. So that's the only clause, and where you're talking about retention of clients, and then not just clients, but it also means that her staff are going to stay on. They're going to buy into it as well. So that's been a strategic buy. So the group that's buying has bought a whole lot of speech pathology businesses. The NDIS is a good example. Anybody in NDIS businesses are selling. They're selling pretty well. Anything that's involved in allied health, speech, NDIS, all those sort of sectors are selling. So strategic sells, where you can leverage, you can reduce costs, you can take the overheads out. They're a good strategy. The cleaning business, Johnny on the street might buy it, but more than likely, and the benefit from a cost reduction is another existing business is going to buy it. If somebody's buying a business for the very first time, my role is to really qualify them. It's really important to qualify them, to make sure they're genuine, make sure they've got the money. That's really important. Yep. How they're going to finance it, and then work with them, and really is work with them. And so, I've got some really strong relationship with my buyers, and buyers that haven't bought businesses from me. They may buy at another stage, or they might go and do something else. Now, it's a bit like the old recruitment days. The candidate today is the client tomorrow. So it's pretty simple stuff. That's nothing complicated.
Do you find some success with off-market transactions? As in, I'm a person selling a business, and then you know of someone who might already suit that business. So rather than presenting it to a bidding sort of process, you might just sort of discreetly approach the other party and then try and arrange a deal that way.
Absolutely. I think when we caught up recently, I mentioned to you the accounting firm that I was selling, and we hadn't met, and there was a series of groups that I knew that were ideally suited to the accounting firm that I sold, and there had to be a cultural fit as well, and the vendor had particular skills and traits that I saw that in the buying group. And the more I understand buyers and companies and individuals, the more I understand what they want, and then you can work out whether there's a fit or not. It's not just are they going to make money, but in your situation, I'm sure when you're looking to acquire accounting firms, there's a cultural fit as well. Sometimes the fit doesn't work.
Certainly, when we've approached it at a sort of a personal business level, regardless of how the transaction might be determined from a sort of a legal perspective, our approach tends to be we look at it from the perspective of, is this the kind of person you're doing business with as a business partner? If that kind of, because the types of issues you face are somewhat collegiate. You have to make joint decisions, and so you have to determine are they people at an interpersonal level you can actually work with. And you mentioned there, the vendors will often stay on under, for good reasons for many months or years after. So that working relationship is pretty important.
I think it's critical. I mean, the vendor that wants to run away really quickly, as a buyer, you ask why. Unless there's a particular reason or you don't need them. Naturally, the vendor that's, I've got a business at the moment in manufacturing building products. 3 years ago, his accountant and his business coach said to him, you need to put your business as much as possible under management. And that's what he did. So he we planned well ahead, planned 3 years ahead, and the business is totally under management. He spends 6 to 8 hours a week in the business, overseeing it, and all day-to-day activities is run by a GM. The GM will go with the business. The GM wants to stay, so it makes it far more attractive, and the multiple we can attract is far better because the risk is not as great.
So I guess what you're essentially, describing then, it seems, is that the business where the owner is not necessarily the operator has more value.
Absolutely.
As opposed to if the owner doesn't turn up every day and the business doesn't run, that's a risk for somebody buying.
Absolutely. As much as you can make yourself redundant and oversee, I think the more attractive it is generally for into the small to medium-sized business world. That's often the biggest risk. As John got the relationship, the cleaner, John who owns the business, who are the relationship there with John? What happens if John walks away?
It's often the trap of a small business owner, I think, and we can all be guilty of this. And there's often things that we know that as small business owners we can have others do much better than us potentially, and have that delegated. And it's almost what you're describing is becoming operationally redundant but strategically still important. Strategically important,
oversee the business and be smart. You don't have to spend 70 hours a week in the business. So yeah, that's what I would suggest. I guess the comment there about planning, I say this, ideally you plan when you start the business, but if you can plan 2-3 years out, as the building manufacturer I just mentioned, that's the perfect scenario. And that's where, your accountant, Nicholas or other accountants or a business consultant or coach, I'm impressed when people and business owners, particularly young business owners, put their hand up and say, I don't know it all. It really impresses me. And it to me, when I'm trying to sell a business, I'm so much more grateful. And it just makes it's a much better business to sell. So, and then I've got a balance of trying to find, the vendor's wanting a certain price, and that's a really interesting story. And a buyer was, wanting to buy at a certain price, but that's another equation.
Yeah. Well, interesting thing there that I think you're raising is that mindset. It really is a mindset, isn't it? Where somebody's saying 2 or 3 years out, I'm planning to sell. The great thing with that kind of mindset is that you can start with that plan. You can do all these great things to get your business in the right position. And let's say 3 years passes, you don't have to sell. And at the very least, all you've done is improve your business and made it so much better as a result. And you can keep trading beyond that. That mindset change, I think, is so valuable in the way people we should all think like that. Often we don't, but it just gives you that option down the track to sell or not sell.
Look, I know, I look back in my working life that I wish I would have used an external resources a bit more and not thought I knew it all. I mean, my business was very profitable, it was very successful. But when you're your own business owner, you sometimes say who you're accountable to. You might be to your husband or to your wife, but you're not really that accountable.
That's
so
right.
Some sort of
which consultant would you have brought in out of interest? What's the most important one you would have said back then? You would have.
I think there's two. I think I say to your accountant, and I say it's some sort of business consultant or coach. Somebody who you can report to at least every quarter on what you're doing. Yeah. And even, and if you can have some sort of conversation, I did used to use my best friend. I used my best mate as a soundboard on things that I was doing. And it wasn't structured enough. I would make it more structured, and I wasn't paying him. I would pay somebody. That's probably the one thing I've realized. I mean, and my problem was it was very profitable and it was a very good business, but it could have been better.
Yeah.
So when things are good, you don't, it's only when things are crap you start to look at.
It's the paradox of success, I think, because sometimes when things are going too well, it creates a level of not necessarily complacency, but it forces people to not necessarily drive. And I've even personally experienced this, where things maybe aren't going so well. It actually forces you to get better, and as a result, you probably end up having a much improved situation.
It's the old story that I've got 2 adult children and a young child, and one of my kids failed miserably when he was 12, 13, 14, picked on and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And he built up all this resilience. He's now 20 years of age, and he had 2 knee operations. He was in a wheelchair for 3 months in year 7, and lots of resilience that built up. But if you as a parent, you want your kid to fail at 12, 13, 14, not at 17, 18, 19. That's the ideal. You can't. If you could orchestrate that, it'd be good. But I think failure is not bad.
Yeah. So determining the value of a business.
Okay, so this is, and there is no, and we say this to everybody. It is difficult. It's not simple, and so the market will dictate, certainly the value of the business, and then the category, the sector that you're in. So if, for example, you're in retail, the multiple you're going to get, and retail is very much on the nose, and really hard to sell at the moment in terms of retail, largely because of the uncertainty with lockdowns, largely because you've got this big fixed overhead, rent, and you're not sure what's going to happen in terms of retail. And unfortunately, a lot of people are not buying into retail. Now, we're moving slowly, and Australia's been slow on this in terms of buying online. We're much slower than overseas. So that's an area that, using that as an example, but it is all about profitability, and it's all about return on investment. And then from there, we determine, profitability, looking at the adjustments, looking at the add backs, and every vendor will say to us, I've taken this money out of the business and done this and whatever, my accountant's done that. That's all fine. We work all that out. We work out an adjusted profit. Everybody's aware of that, and it needs to be clean. And then it's things like, what systems are in place? How ready is it to market? Key risks, such as we talked about before, in terms of the owner. How involved is the owner? How much of it is under management and processes? And then there's a multiple that's placed on it. So for a couple of examples I mentioned before about retail, a multiple of 1 to 1.5, and getting a 1.5 multiple on retail is really hard. And that's on EBITDA. I'm not talking about anything else. Manufacturing will vary, and manufacturing is quite attractive. I think it's becoming more attractive in the last 12 months because of COVID, because of shipping, because of logistics, etc. The multiples are varying from 2.5, about 4, depending on the size of the business and also the area they're involved in. So each category, and we buy into these surveys, get the surveys, we look at our own data. And from that, we work out what the potential multiple is. Ultimately, the buyer is also, and the market's going to dictate that. Now, my job is to make it as compelling as possible for a buyer to buy a business. And if I've got competition, that makes it attractive. I don't always have competition. I'm not, I've got business at the moment where I've got really one very strong buyer, and then it's trying to negotiate a price that's going to suit the buyer, but also suit the vendor. So it doesn't always, we're not always going to have 3 buyers that come on that particular day. And there are sometimes buyers say, I'm really interested, but I'm working another transaction, or come back to me in February. I've got one at the moment. We're saying we're waiting for board approval. We may not get it to February. So, and we've got another potential offer on the table. What do? Do we wait, or do we go forward? And that's a conversation I need to have with the vendor.
Yeah. So in terms of sort of those other risks we've mentioned, their staff, systems, client relationships, I sometimes often see through our work here, the key man risk. There might be a vendor where they say there's a few particular people. How have you sort of dealt with those issues in the past? Have you sort of included them in the sale transaction in any sort of special or particular way?
Well, it may be. So it may be a situation where the GM needs to come on board, the operational manager needs to come on board, pardon me, and if he or she doesn't, what can be done. That may be conditional. It may be a conditional offer based on these things. And I say to every vendor, the buyer will make their offer. So it's the buyer's offer to buy a business with their terms and conditions. The vendor can or not accept them, and then there is often some sort of negotiation. Now, usually most of the time we come to a realization. An example: last year, I was selling a removalist business in New South Wales, and this was right in the and we had the transaction done pre-COVID, and then COVID came along, lockdown, all that sort of stuff. It almost died. We had to change the transaction. We actually changed the way in which the vendor was going to pay the purchaser because of the uncertainty. We didn't know how long, and Sydney was pretty good. So they came out of lockdown much quicker than us, but we had to change the transaction. And so it was all over Zoom, obviously, had to create a series of scenarios that may work for both the buyer and the vendor. The buyer had already he was moving to regional Victoria, and he bought a pub. And he was so he was already off. He was ready to go, and we had to negotiate it because of something that wouldn't have picked it pre-COVID. COVID's changed a lot of things. What I'm seeing more and more in terms of determining value of a business is, we talked about the past history, but I think we're going to see more and more in the next 2 to 3 years of earnouts, particularly for businesses between a price point between $3 to $8 million price point. I think we're going to see more earnout type scenarios where a proportion will be paid up front and some will be paid over a 12 months to 2 year period. Vendors don't like it. That's the only problem. Factors that influence a vendor's decision to sell, and it is their timing, it's their return on investment, and it's changed. As I said before, we talked about this as what makes I sold a business because I wanted to do something different. I've had three or four really distinct careers, and right now balance and lifestyle is a big change. I think the next year we're going to see more people, maybe, and when I won't get political, not necessarily happy with what's happening with the lockdowns over the last couple of years. Nothing we can do about it. And then there's the other element of it is the risk in retaining. The 40-year-old, and I often have this, the 40-year-old buyer will say, well, it's a great business. Why are they selling? Well, my vendor's 62 and he's done. He's tired. And even if he's only spending 8 hours a week in the business, it's constantly here. It doesn't stop. When you own a business, it's your baby, and you're still concerned about it.
So we're looking to sell our business, and we have a whole series of information to provide. So financial information and other details regarding the business.
This is probably, it sounds basic, but it's so important. Really, really important to work with your accountant. And to have full financial information and to be transparent. Now, the more information I have to represent a vendor, and the easier it is. I want to provide it's a story about your business I'm selling.
So that initial starting point, Narrim, when you list a business, you'll presumably prepare an information memorandum which would describe the business, the owner, the operations, and a little bit of a snapshot of financial information, and then you'd seek, presumably, maybe just talk us through that sort of end to end, how it would start from initial listing all the way through to getting contract signed.
Okay, so I get, prior to listing a business, I guess the first equation often people say is, what's my business worth? So the only way I can work out what the business is, so I've got to ask a series of questions. So there'll be some sort of meeting and understand the business. And the more I understand the business, the easier it is. It's financial information, which is number one. That's critical. Then it's personnel. It's structure. It's a lease. A retail business that only has 18 months left on a lease with no options, problem, right? Go and get another option. Or we're not sure what the landlord's going to be doing, right? Really hard in terms of using that in terms of retail. The client-supply relationship is really important. Who are those relationships with? Are they contractual? Are they, what sort of annuity? Any business that has an annuity effect, your business is that. In accounting practice, people generally don't move. A proportion of people that stay with their accountant 5, 10, 20, 30 years, it's an annuity business. So you know if you're going to have $3 million worth of revenue, $3.5 million of revenue, that's really important. And then the management structure. What is the structure that's in the business, the personnel structure, who are the key people, operational, all that sort of stuff. All of that plays a key role. So the information, now once I get all that information, and then, we determine a price, and we might set a price with it, there might be a bit of a stretch with the price. We might say, well, we can try and stretch it. We'll try and have a little bit more. And then there's often negotiations in terms of price. Now, rarely do we set a low price. It's never, I haven't had a situation we set a low price. Businesses will take anywhere from, I've had 2 businesses sell within 3 months in the last 18 months, but most of the time, and I'm talking about full transaction, legals, everything, it's anywhere between 6 months to 12 months. Most of the time, 6 to 12 months. Sometimes it's 15 months. The last year has made it difficult. It's slowed things down. No question. People have slowed down and the decision making has slowed down. I have to say that.
Yeah. So you present this information. There'd be some meetings with some potential purchasers, and then at that point there would be generally a non-binding offer or a heads of agreement.
Yeah, exactly that. Heads of agreement, and the heads of agreement should spell out the major terms.
Yep, all the key terms.
So some sort of heads of agreement term sheet, and then obviously we want to make it binding. It's usually either maybe subject to finance, and then it's subject to due diligence, subject to a lease, subject to a couple of other conditions. It might be subject to a particular contracts they may have in place. There might be a whole series of things that may be subject to. All of that is up for negotiation. It might be subject to, we want the speech pathology business, it's really important that the team stay, that we want that is subject to, we want the team to stay. If the vendor is staying and the principal speech pathologist is going to stay, far more likely everybody else is staying, particularly the same conditions are there and it's attractive. You want to make it attractive. A vendor should know, and I will know whether it's going to be an attractive proposition, usually for the staff. If you're moving from, Greensboro to Frankston, we're moving Frankston to move the whole operation, right? Not that attractive. But most of the time, buyers will buy a business and will keep things the same for a period of time. Over time, you may want to change things, but you don't want to rock the boat too quickly, but if it's a good business.
The continuity, great. Well, we have a question here from the audience. What is roughly the multiplier on EBIT for the hospitality industry in this sort of current period of time?
It's going to vary, Nicholas. I mean, this one I'm going to be cautious in what I say, because it's going to depend on where, what, and size. Hospitality, CBD versus regional versus the profitability versus there's a series of things. I met up with a client, potential client recently, and I told him what we think we would get. He wanted more, and I said, well, that's fine. I don't believe we're going to get it, so I've got to walk away. He wanted far more than what we're going to get, but it's going to vary. Right now, depending on where it is, that's the problem. So, and we have to look at current figures. I've had a number of owners say to me, "This is what we did back in 2019."
Yeah, very fluid situation with that industry.
Yeah, so there's a number of factors. What I'd be saying, Nicholas, to that individual is, I'm more than happy to have a conversation with that person and give an opinion, because that's what it is, of what we would be able to get, and that's a free consultation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think, Narrim, we were discussing outside of this forum that you'd be more than happy to see people with the details up there for phone numbers and email addresses and so forth. So anyone attending today is more than welcome to make contact. Yeah, please. And my hand is up. I say this loud and clear: plan. And if you just want to spend 10, 15 minutes on the phone, or you want to meet with me, I'm more than happy to do that. And if you want to buy me a coffee, even better. And I'll give you my advice. And I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to give you an opinion based on many years of selling businesses, as well as having sold a couple of my own. And the other thing I would say is listen to others. Listen to your accountant and engage in a good accountant, engage in a good consultant who's not
necessarily within your business that can look at it. It's very hard to look at your business sometimes when you're in it. We either were too hard on ourselves, which I think we are, or we're too soft on ourselves.
Well, thank you for today. Really appreciate your time. It's great to have your expertise on board, and thank you for the audience for attending. We look forward to seeing you next time. Probably won't have another webinar before Christmas, so to all you out there, I can't believe it, but we're saying Merry Christmas already. So there you go. So thank you, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you, Nicholas, and I really appreciate everybody listening. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.